Good morning, sixth grade. It was really nice to see you guys yesterday in the Zoom session. So that kind of concluded the Byzantine Empire and the Eastern Roman Empire. So now we're going to start talking about Arabia and Saudi Arabia and all that, because these are going to be the homes of the Ottoman Turks. And we're going to start to talk about how they're the ones that started to come over and take over part of the Roman Empire. Okay, just like always, we always start off with the geography. So we are going to talk about the geography of the Arabian Peninsula today. But first, just to remind you, yesterday we did talk about how the church split into two, and the whole reason the eastern part of the empire and the western part of the empire split was because they couldn't agree on Christianity. They didn't agree with the Latin. They didn't agree with the Greeks. They didn't agree with what they believed in. They didn't agree with the powers that the popes or the emperors had. So it caused this huge split in the church. And just to remind you, Catholicism, we still follow the Western Roman Empire religion, and that's still what we follow. The eastern part of the empire we talked about, it kind of moved into the Muslim beliefs or the Muslim religion, and that's what we're going to kind of get into today. Well, not today, but this next session we're going to talk about how the Muslims started coming about in the Arabian area, and we're also going to talk about the Ottoman Turks. We're going to start talking about things that have to do with the Latin. So if you're a fan of Latin, that's kind of the stuff we're going to talk about starting now. So let's go ahead and jump into the geography of Arabia. Alright, so today we're going to talk about the geography and life in Arabia. Today what you guys are going to be able to do is you're going to be able to describe how Arabia was mostly desert land, but we're also going to talk about how Arabia was also a great location for everything to be successful, such as trade and for religion and for just transporting goods. Even though it's a huge desert, people needed to cross through Arabia to get to the seas, and this is why it was so important. So we're going to talk about that today. So for thousands of years, traders have crossed Arabia on routes between Europe, Asia, and Africa. So Arabia was located right between all these countries. And Arabia is actually really close to it's pretty much the eastern part of the Mediterranean Sea. Travel through Arabia was not easy, and this has to do with the deserts and the heat. But travelers had to cross these deserts in scorching temperature and a little bit of water. But because of this, they were able to become a great location and an area where they were able to make a lot of money. So if you look at the map, that's a picture of Arabia. And you can see, if you look to the top left, you can see that's where the Mediterranean Sea is. And if you look right where it says Europe, you'll see Constantinople. But if you notice, those are all trading routes around Arabia. And you had to go through Arabia in order to connect, or in order to get, pretty much Arabia connected Europe, Asia, and Africa. It was right in the middle. Okay, so Arabia, it was a peninsula. If you remember what a peninsula was, it's a piece of land that gets water on three different sides. So Arabia, it was mostly hot and so mostly a desert. So in Arabia, the temperatures are extremely hot, scorching temperatures, lack of water, and this made it really difficult for travelers. During this time, Arabian's location and physical features, it was shaped the way life was lived, because you always have to adapt to your resources. And back then, it adapted perfectly. Okay? So Arabia, it's known as the crossroads location. And the reason why it's called the crossroads location, it's because it's between Africa, Asia, and Europe. So everyone, you need to cross through Arabia to get to the different areas. And since they're right there in the middle, this was kind of like the resting ground, an area where everyone can come, meet up, get a break, and then keep going and moving on the journey. And when they did this, they brought a lot of goods. And you can see that a lot of the goods were coming from Africa, Asia, and Europe. So these trading routes that link the three continents, they all passed through Arabia. And this is why a lot of historians and geographers call Arabia the crossroads location, because you have to cross through Arabia to get to the other parts of the lands. So during this time, merchants, they carried goods such as spices, silk, and gold all along these trading routes. Some of these trading routes were on land, others were on water, but most of it was on land because of the desert. So trade, it brought many different groups of people through Arabia, and these people were able to introduce new ideas, new products, and all these new cultures and everything influenced the culture and society of Arabia. So Arabia's location is shaped greatly by its physical features. It lies with hot, dry air. The climate normally is the same all across Arabia and northern Africa. So in Arabia, you would see these huge sandy dunes or sandy deserts,
Sand dunes, what they are, they're just like hills of sand, and it's shaped by the wind. And you can kind of see this like in Aladdin when they sing Arabian Nights. You always see people walking on camels and going across these sands. And these sand dunes, it's all sand. They're like little mountains, and they can go as tall as 800 feet high. And some of the world's largest sanded desert is called the Rubi Al Khali, and this means empty quarter, but this was the biggest sand desert out there. It's in Arabia. So Arabia's deserts, they have very limited amount of water, so there's no permanent lakes or rivers, and that's because of the heat, and there's just no water in the desert. So pretty much what they have was these things called oases. In the photo right there, that's an oasis. An oasis is like a fertile area in the desert where there is water that comes to the surface. Sometimes these oases aren't permanent and they're just temporary, but this is where everyone goes to meet up to get water. So these were like key stops where Arabia's overland trade, where it goes. So pretty much these oases began to grow into towns. You can see an oasis in Lion King. You see the oasis when they come and drink at the Peace Rock, but also in Aladdin. I'll just refer a lot to Aladdin because that's something that you can relate to. So although the deserts covered most of the Arabia and other parts of the land, there were still mountains, and the mountains were on the south. They had the sea coast on the west, and then you had just some coastal areas around there. And this was also used for trade, but most of Arabia is a desert, and they had to adapt to that. So if you look at this picture, that's what Arabia typically looks like. And it's all sand, all hilly, and that's what you call a sand dune. If you notice, there is no trees anywhere, and it's because of the heat and just because of the way it is. It's a desert. So Arabia, it's one of the hottest, driest places in the world. And the sun, typically the skies are clear and the temperature reaches 100 degrees every single day. So just imagine that. And this climate makes it really hard for plants and animals to survive. Okay? So desert plants don't grow there. It doesn't get any rain. There's no roots. There's no plants. So people had to find a way to live in Arabia, and they had to adapt. And that's exactly what people did. They eventually adapted to these hot weather, and they were able to make a society. And the way it happened was they developed two different types of cultures, which we'll talk about tomorrow or on Monday. So as a quick review, today we talked about the geography of Arabia. We talked about how it was a perfect location called the Crossroads location. And the reason why is because if it connected, it was right in between the middle of Africa, Asia, and Europe. And if you needed to travel through there, you had to go through Arabia. So it was a perfect location. Because of this crossroads location, a lot of different people went to these places, and it developed a different society and culture because everyone started to trade. Everyone brought their cultures with them, and it was just a perfect location for them to do this. Unfortunately, in Arabia, it was extremely hot and deserty, so they had to adapt. There wasn't really water. They did have little small temporary lakes, and these were called oases, but pretty much it is the biggest and hottest desert in the world, where it daily reaches up to temperatures about 100 degrees every single day. There's sand dunes, nothing but sand. It's really hard for things to survive and live there, but the people in Arabia adapted, and it became one of the greatest locations because of the trade, because of the culture, and because of the way they adapted to it. For homework, I want you guys to answer these 3 questions. Number 1, what are the main features of Arabia's environment? So if you had to describe Arabia's 3 features, how would you describe it to somebody? Number 2, what are the benefits and drawbacks of life in Arabia? So what are good things about living in Arabia? And what are the bad things about living in Arabia? Number 3, what helped the Arabs succeed at trade? So what made them really successful at trade? Think about that. Use some inferences. Use your knowledge. What would make them really successful at trade? I'll give you a hint. It has to do with crossroads location. All right, so that concluded our lesson for today. Today we talked about the geography and how they were able to shape it, or how they were able to adapt to the geography to live. So if you have any questions, feel free to let me know and message me. I'm always here to help you. And I'm really looking forward to seeing you guys tomorrow for our first ever game day. Don't forget, you can sleep in. Game day starts at 10 a.m. So I'm looking forward to seeing you all there, 6th grade. If you have no questions, then I'll see you tomorrow. See ya.